This is CityCast Seattle. I'm Jane C. Hu, and here's what Seattle's talking about. Today on CityCast Seattle, we are catching you up on the latest election results. We'll get to a full recap in just a second, but first, among the results, 0.48% of people, around 650 people, wrote in someone for mayor. So I want to ask, Marcus Harrison Green, founder of the South Seattle Emerald and Hinton Publishing and a columnist with The Stranger, who would you write in?
Wow, that is the question, isn't it? You know, I would have went with Jacinda Ardern. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I just recently watched the documentary Prime Minister. She was the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she was just such a badass and had a different type of leadership and approach to governing. And so I would have said Jacinda. It would be her. So yeah.
I don't know that do we have rules about that? I mean, I know that definitely some old school Seattle folks would not be that pleased with the situation.
Well,
but I take her as mayor.
I mean, there are a lot of people who were complaining about, Katie Wilson being from upstate New York. So let alone somebody being from New Zealand, I suppose. Anyway.
Ryan Packer, contributing editor at The Urbanist and transportation advocate. Who would you write in?
Well, if I'm forced to write in someone, I guess I'm going to go with a foreigner as well. Go with Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo. Would be who I'd write in.
Let's get some female leaders from other countries. It seems like that's the vibe right now.
I gotta say, Jane and Ryan, we're keeping with the whole thing that the best Americans are not from America.
And Seattle has a long tradition of mayors being from somewhere else. Do you know the first mayor born in the city was Jenny Durkin?
Wow.
Oh, really? That's a fun fact. All right, well, let's do a quick recap of what we know so far about these election results. I feel like the top headline is that progressive candidates have been leading the Seattle City Council races. We've got Alexis Mercedes Rink winning by a landslide. I think she got 79% of the vote as of the moment. So it seems like she's successfully secured a victory. Dionne Foster has a pretty large lead over Sarah Nelson as well, 57% to 41%. Eddie Lynn pretty decisively beat Adonis Duckworth, 68% to 31%. We also have a new city prosecutor. Erica Evans beat Ann Davison 62% to 37%. And right now, Gurmai Zahilai and Claudia Balducci are still neck and neck for King County Executive.
Yeah.
But I feel like what everyone's really talking about right now is the mayoral race. So as of election night, with 23% of registered voters' ballots counted, Harrell was 7 points ahead. 24 hours later, Wednesday night, his lead has widened to 8 points, 53% to 45%. And that's with 27% of registered voters' ballots counted.
Right.
The Seattle Times' David Croman posted on Blue Sky today saying that he's talked to the King County folks, and those folks say that only ballots submitted up to Monday or even early on Tuesday were counted as of Wednesday nights, and none from drop boxes at all. So I know Wilson supporters have been leaning hard on the hope that these late voters, people who voted very late on Tuesday, probably dropped them off at the box last minute, lean more progressive. And curious for your thoughts. How do you all think this is going to shake out?
Oh my goodness, that's the $1 million question, I guess, literally, with some of the money that the IEs threw into this race here. Earlier today, talking to the campaign manager for the Wilson campaign, Alex Gallo Brown, whether he was putting on a great face for me or not, he was certainly cautiously optimistic. He's hopeful in the fact that we only have less than 30% of ballots counted, and there are a lot of people. He was saying that progressives seem to have a neurosis around turning in their ballot very late, including, quite frankly, he shared some people who work on the campaign. So I would hesitate to make any definitive conclusions until Friday at 4:30 p.m.
What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are trying to crunch the math right now and see what percentage Katie needs to get in the remaining ballots to eke it out. I think the missing piece is we don't actually know what the denominator is yet. There's so many ballots out there.
Right.
People were directly instructed to use boxes this year instead of the mail. And I know several people who voted on Tuesday who King County doesn't even register that they have their ballot yet. And so
Right.
I think the question is kind of how big that turnout actually ends up being. It's going to be key. But I think at this point, it's a full toss up.
Full toss-up. That's what we love to hear. Drama.
Yeah, and I will say, I talked to a consultant I was covering Gurmai Zahalai's election night party, which, by the way, I don't know if he's going to win, but that man threw the best party of all time in terms of election nights. I'm still recovering. But anyway.
What made it good, Marcus?
I literally walked in. I was like, am I at the right place? You had the $18 cocktails flowing. Snoop Dogg was banging through the speakers. We had Luther Vandross, and everybody was, in a celebratory mood. I was like, I hope to God that it's, a decent result for the people here, because this is going to really be a wet blanket on the night here. But anyhow, said that to say, though, that, I talked to a consultant there, and his understanding, at least this is what he told me, was that Mayor Harrell needed to have at least 56 or 55% of the vote on election night in order to win. And I talked to him, I followed up with him today, after the drop that we just had. And I said, hey, are you still confident with that? And he said, yes. So it'll be interesting to see if he'll be proved correct or not.
I'm also curious to know how you think that some of the last minute news about Harrell could have played into things. On Tuesday, on election day around noon, KOW reported that a Harrell staffer alleged that he might have violated some ethics policies back in 2016 as city council president by having the city do admin for the Royal Esquire Club, which is a black men's social club that Harrell was board chair of at the time. Could that reporting make a difference? It also was fascinating to discover that that's actually where he had his election night party as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure who advised him on that, but that seemed an interesting look. I'll say, Ryan, I'm just curious. We're both journalists. I certainly respect your work. Were you curious as of the timing of that piece, because it was right on election day?
Yeah, and I think Erica Barnett also had a piece about Harrell's travel behavior during the administration, which I'm sure she had been working on for quite a while, but dropped on election day. Ultimately, I think the piece would probably look very different if he had lost. And so you're kind of trying to get that out as soon as possible before it becomes stale. In terms of the impact that had, I think it's probably minimal. All the stories that we've had during the campaign have pretty much kind of sunk in for people, and you're either kind of swayed by a pattern of kind of questionable behavior by the mayor, or you're in his camp. I don't think that the one more drip of a story was going to kind of move the needle.
I agree with you somewhat, Ryan. I do think, depending on what the numbers end up being, if this ends up being a race that's decided by less than 1,000 votes, it becomes one of those things where every little bit mattered. That being said, right, that's yet to be determined. If the gap ends up being fairly wide, and 10,000 or so votes, then I think, to your point, it's fairly negligible. And, I will say, in terms of just reporting on this race from the column that I do for both The Stranger and The Emerald, I have to concur with what Ryan was saying. I think most people were pretty much dug in one way or the other on whom they were going for. I think there were more people who were undecided about whether or not to vote in this election versus whom they were voting for.
There's also the fact that the Katie Wilson campaign intentionally took the high road and didn't go negative on the mayor, apart from his policy record. It didn't accuse him of being unethical or get into anything on his family life or anything like that. And, they did pride themselves on that on Tuesday night at their event. But I think a lot of people are kind of wondering, since the Harrell campaign went so negative on Katie Wilson and her personal qualities.
I will say this, just full transparency. I worked with Katie Wilson on a media rights thing about 5 years ago. And then I've covered Bruce Harrell since he was my city council member almost 13 years ago. And he was actually the first elected official that I ever interviewed. So, I feel like I know these people fairly well. And I'll say this is pretty on brand for their character. And Katie typically comes across as a very nice person to people, who aren't necessarily super familiar with her. And she, at times, very hesitant, I think, to go for the dagger, if you will. There was another journalist who said, that she needed to have more killer in her, metaphorically speaking, of course, for this race versus a Bruce Harrell who has shown in the past, quite frankly, that he is willing to do what it takes to win at the end of the day.
Well, I hate to interrupt, but we have so much more to talk about, but let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about what's happening in our larger region. We want to hear from you, listeners. What do you make of the election results so far? Let us know by texting or leaving us a voicemail on the CityCast Seattle hotline, 206-880-3931. We have a lot more news to discuss, and let's get back to it. So, Ryan, I know you have been following races in Puget Sound in general. Curious to know from you, what are we seeing in those races and across the region?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, we highlighted 6 races from Bremerton to Issaquah, Tacoma, Kirkland, Bellevue, and we're at 3-3. So it's a full split in terms of which way those races are going to go at this point in time as of Wednesday. And so which is kind of interesting.
So we're not the only place with some cliffhanger vote counts happening, huh?
No, definitely not. There's one race I'm tracking that has a 14 vote margin at this point.
14?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez. I got to say, with all these cliffhangers, but can we just go back maybe to voting on the day so that we know like we would know right now who won everything. And now we got to maybe wait until Monday. I'm sorry. Maybe it's my adult ADHD, but my God. Anyway.
We want to go back to the era of hanging chads being the drama instead of just waiting and waiting and waiting days and days.
Yeah, or maybe we could just do it this way, but we have all of the campaign parties on Friday.
You know?
I do feel like for the last few elections, it's been all this suspense on a Tuesday night and then days and days of just refreshing the page at 4 p.m. And the journalists want to sleep, but It's not happening. What does it mean that Wilson and Harrell are so neck and neck? I feel like Seattle thinks of itself as this very progressive place. We saw on Tuesday night that Mamdani was elected mayor of New York. A lot of folks had been comparing Wilson and Mamdani. Why didn't Wilson win by a landslide if we are, in fact, this very progressive city?
To your point about the Mamdani comparison, I think that was always a little exaggerated. But I think on the other hand, when you look at Bruce, I think it was also an exaggeration of how, that he wasn't an Eric Adams, I'll say, right? I don't want to speak for Ryan, but I would suggest that he might agree with me on this, that I don't think Bruce is a clear-cut ideologue. He's willing to, shall we say, adjust his approach if he believes that is the best thing that will allow him to win. I mean, I think we saw that even over the last 6 months. I think that he's tacked more so to the left with some of his approaches, suggesting that there be, a form of reparations, for the Black community, right? I mean, he wasn't doing that certainly when he first came into office. And so I think there are a lot of people who see Bruce and they may not think that he is the second coming of Karl Marx or anything, but they think that he's sort of progressive enough. And I'll say I do think that it's a testament to my theory about this race, that it was really about risk versus fear. I talked to people who were grudging voters on both sides, whether it was with Wilson or with Bruce. You had folks who I spoke with who voted for Wilson and were like, I voted for her, but I don't know if she has the experience. I think that is a genuine concern. And then you would talk to people who grudgingly voted for Bruce, and they'd be like, I want to vote for the person who is supposedly more progressive, but ultimately I'm scared. We have Donald Trump, who, he's sending troops and National Guards people to other places. What happens if it's there? I want to have somebody who, at the very least, even if I don't necessarily like the guy all that much, why not have a little bit of continuity and some certainty in times of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, when you talk about risk, I think, when you're talking about a mayor, I think people are a lot less likely to want to take that risk. We have these very clear victories on the city council. And so I think people are much more willing to try someone new, go a different direction when it comes to a city council member. But when it's a mayor, I think a lot of those messages about Wilson being inexperienced and not having any other elected official job, I think really did kind of sink in a little bit.
I know there have been a lot of questions about what do people feel like a mayor should do, right? Like, what role should a mayor have? What experience do they need to have to be able to be a good mayor? I think also there have been all these questions about what will this election tell us more broadly about what people think. And given these early results, this progressive shift in the city council, these kind of cliffhanger results so far in some of the races, what do you all think this says about politics in Seattle right now and how voters are feeling?
I think it shows a level of, quite frankly, just uncertainty about where this city stands right now. I will tell you, there are so many people who, depending on how you viewed the city and depending on where you lived in the city, you had a different interpretation of how things were going. I talked to folks in Magnolia and they thought, quite frankly, that Bruce was doing a great job and things had improved and, they were incrementally getting better. I would talk to people who lived in the CD and the south end of Seattle, and they would say, we continue to be pushed out and he's been ignoring us, right? Their interpretation of the city, that it was continuing to leave them behind. And so I think we have, as a city, quite frankly, a dual personality and that's quite frankly indicative of some of the growing inequality that we have here in the city. And I will say it, some of the economic segregation that we have in the city as well.
Yeah, we've definitely seen the pendulum swing, especially since 2020. It's interesting. A lot of the things that I think Bruce Harrell's administration is kind of trying to take credit for were kind of dynamics that were pretty natural in terms of downtown Seattle coming back, people going back to the office, projects that had been long in the works that he was able to get in the ground and cut the ribbon on. And so, ultimately it's a little bit of timing and luck. But I think ultimately, I think it does show, especially if we end up where it looks like we're going to be, which is within 1 or 2 points of each other, pretty strong contrasting visions for the future of the city, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, what does it mean if, given that a lot of these progressive city council members have been elected, how are they going to work with Harrell, assuming that he gets reelected, especially given how hard some of them have campaigned for Wilson? Like, is that going to be a rift in the city government?
I don't expect it to be a rift. The Harrell administration has proven itself to be pretty adaptable in terms of what response it knows it's going to get from the city council. I think they'll find a niche to work with the new council. It's obviously not a radical shift. We're still going to have most of the 2023 elected council members, and so it's a small shift, but an important one.
If the Harrell administration has one sort of North Star, is that he likes to be liked. The very first candidate forum after the primary, it was in Bitter Lake, and one of the questions that was asked of the candidates, and it was Katie Wilson was sitting next to Bruce Harrell, was, are you to the left of your opponent? And Bruce Harrell said, yeah, I think that I am to the left. And while there might have been, I'm just going to be honest with you, there's some eye rolling in that room. I mean,
understandably,
I'll no comment. To Ryan's point, I mean, he's shown to be very adaptable and shall we say, just a willing and openness to change when the wind blows a certain way.
I think the interesting question to me about a second Harrell administration, which I'm not making predictions about right now, but assuming that would happen, would be kind of what happens when the chickens come home to roost in terms of what was laid in his first term, which was kind of very middle of the road things, a housing levy that wasn't really very ambitious, a transportation levy that's the same, and kind of people kind of realizing that these ideas aren't really paying the dividends that they kind of would expect, because during the first term, he's been reaping the benefits of previous administrations. And as your mayor, you have to be setting up wins for your successor. But I haven't really seen this mayor really do that.
Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about at least 2 things that the next administration is going to have to deal with. If you want more Seattle news, you're in luck. In addition to this podcast, CityCast Seattle also has a daily newsletter. To get the latest headlines and events in your inbox every morning, you can subscribe at seattle.citycast.fm. I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2 propositions on the ballot, which I feel like propositions never get love, right? Like, they're the unsexy little bits of of policy that need to come to fruition. But of course, all of the big races are what grab the headlines. But it seems like the two propositions that were on the ballot are both likely to pass. Prop 1 is a levy that would provide more than $1.3 billion to fund subsidized early learning programs, universal access to free 2-year college degrees, and K through 12 programs that provide access to mental health care, among other things. Stuff that Seattleites love. This has currently 76% of voters in favor so far as of Wednesday night. I think the yearly cost, according to the Seattle Times Education Lab, is that if you own a house that is worth $1.1 million, which is apparently the median home price now, which, whew, that yearly cost to the homeowner is, right, is $656. And so far, yeah, it seems like people are into this, and curious for your thoughts. Is that surprising to you or not?
No, I mean, I think, the joke is that Seattleites have never met a tax they didn't like. And I'll say this. I mean, I think that it just does sort of underscore the progressive bona fides, more or less, of our city. We as a city are usually very much prone to vote for things when it comes to things like mental health, when it comes to things like enhanced early education. When it comes to those type of things, we very much fit the label of the wokesters here in the Pacific Northwest.
We do love a levy. So apparently this the first iteration of this was passed in 1990, and we have just been reapproving it in like 6 to 7 year chunks since then. So this effectively kicks the can down the road for another 6 years. I mean, is this a way to live? Like, is this sustainable? Like, are we just going to do this every 6 years until we all die? And beyond, probably.
Well, that's our tax structure in Washington state, basically. To me, I think this underscores the fact that Seattleites are, on the whole, really on board with big, bold, transformative programs, and might even be more okay with something even bigger than this in terms of actually having an impact. If you think about filling the need that's going to be created by the cuts at the federal level, there's some things happening on that in the state level, but I think there's the appetite for Seattleites to step up and help with things like education is pretty huge.
So I'm just curious about that. Do you think this, whether it ends up being Harrell or it ends up being Wilson, do you think maybe something like this signals to them that, oh, hey, like we have the opportunity to do something big and bold if we need to, in terms of, putting something on the ballot, whether it's to support infrastructure or media or what have you?
I mean, we haven't seen that the Harrell administration want to kind of do that. And so that's kind of my point about kind of taking the middle of the road approach. I think wanting to tout the investments, but not get the Chamber of Commerce too mad at you about raising the tax level. And so
do you think this would signal that, oh, I have carte blanche to do this now, where he used to be reticent, I guess?
No, I mean, having a transportation levy passed by, dozens of points didn't seem to make them think that they could go bolder with the education levy. The voters aren't really their temperature gauge. I think like I said, it's the Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce.
Speaking of taxes and businesses and bold moves, curious what you all think of Prop 2, right? So it increases business and occupation tax rates, but it also raises the threshold for who has to pay those taxes from $100,000 to $2 million. So essentially using some funds for bigger businesses to protect smaller businesses. And so far, 67% of voters have said yes, pass this. Is that a bold move? I mean, it feels like such a small percentage difference. It's in like literally the hundredths place. It's like 0.004%, I believe, instead. Is that enough to actually move the needle in this city?
It's a small, bold move, I think, if I can say that.
A medium bold move.
Yeah. It's one of the recommendations that Progressive Revenue Task Force came up with to make our tax system in the city more fair. It's coming at a time when you're able to generate a little bit more revenue, so it's really attractive because we have a looming budget deficit coming in 2027. But I also don't think there are two things it would not have happened without, which is Alexis Mercedes Rink being on the city council and coming up with the proposal and bringing it to the mayor's office, but also Katie Wilson being in the race.
Yeah, she was also on that task force too, ironically enough. I know, particularly in the south end of Seattle, where you have a ton of small businesses, whether they're coffee shops or donut shops or what have you, I know they certainly expressed a level of appreciation. The threshold wasn't any lower that it impacted them. So I think that's what allowed, certain buy-in from the smaller business community.
Yeah, as a freelance writer for many years, I was technically a small business and had to file taxes. And I mean, $100K is a reasonable amount for an individual to make these days, or at least to stay in the city, right? But $2 million as a freelance writer? Nah, you pay those taxes, man.
Yeah, you're not doing a tax strike, Jane, this year. I take it. Okay.
No, not me, not me. Well, I feel like there's all of this heavy news, big implications, serious implications for our city. But I'm curious, what would you all have liked to see on the ballot that wasn't on there, no matter how serious or silly?
I think we should have, if we are going to do this vote by mail crap, we should just have like a city holiday, like the whole entire week from Tuesday to Friday. We do nothing but party. It's like a siestas every hour on the hour. As the ballots come in, we toast. We non-alcoholic for folks who don't drink, but for those who do, make sure it's something strong, a strong spirit. We need more joy in life. And I figure if we are at sort of late stage capitalism, smoke them while you got them. So any excuse to party, let's put that on the ballot.
Maybe that would help people actually get their ballots in earlier. Ryan, what would you want to see on the ballot?
Have you guys been down to Pike Place and seen it fully pedestrianized?
No, but I've seen the pictures and it looks so nice.
I think we should put a ballot measure to make a pedestrian street in every neighborhood, including Pike Place Market.
I love that.
I love it
Please.
too. I can only imagine the city council meetings though with the public comment. That would be very entertaining.
Well, we can hope for the best for the future. And I mean, as for the other election stuff, I think that this is just going to drag on for a while. According to King County elections, they've received ballots from 38% of eligible voters. And so far, it seems like the vote counts include about 27% of registered voters. So I think we're going to expect to see a lot more results coming in the next few days. Before I let you all go, have you all checked to see if your ballot has been counted?
Yep, I'm signed up for the text messages, so I don't even have to look it up.
Amazing. Marcus?
I have not. I continue to deliriously have faith in our institutions. So, but now you got me wondering. Now you got me second guessing.
You should go check. Just a PSA in case people didn't know. You can actually go check if you go to info.kingcounty.gov. There should be a link up there to check the status of your ballot. Mine has not been counted. It has been received. So I wait with bated breath for my democratic action to be counted among the masses.
Of course.
Well, that's all for today here at CityCast Seattle. I'm your host, Jane C. Hu. Marcus, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Jane.
And Ryan, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks. Happy to be here my first time.
All right, listeners, we also want to hear from you. Send us your news tips, your questions, your hot goss, or where you would want to see a ballot box put in your neighborhood by sending an email to seattle@citycast.fm or by leaving a voicemail at 206-880-3931. Until next time, see ya, Seattle.